Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Joining me today is Sara Davenport-Smith, founder of the Utah Coalition of Cities and Counties, or UC3, and one of the sharpest constitutional advocates out there. With over 20 years in government relations across Utah, Washington, Nevada, and Montana, she's led policy fights, built coalitions, driven aggressive lobbying strategies, and even stepped into the arena as a city council member. She brings real-world experience, business leadership, and a passion for empowering communities. Not only that, she's a proud wife of 22 years and the mom of two amazing teenage daughters. You're really going to want to hear what she has to say today. Sara, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Trent, for having me. This is great.
So glad to have you. So tell our audience, what is UC3?
UC3, in a nutshell, is a membership organization for local governments, cities, towns, counties, and our sole purpose is to reinstate, reinforce, and amplify local, constitutionally based control. Period.
Wow. So tell me, normally when people think politics, they think, oh, DC, that's where the spotlight is, that's where the glory is. Citizens, why go? Tell us why go that direction.
Well, it's actually really simple because it's all found in our constitutions, actually. So when you go to our federal constitution, right, you look at the Bill of Rights because that's the real spirit of our constitution. It starts off with the rights of the individual. Our Utah Constitution, first article, talks about the importance and the rights of the individual, freedom of the individual, and how it's government's job to protect the individual. So logical connection that we made as a team saying, we're going to start with local government. That's what it's all about, because since the individual has the most power, according to our constitutions, it makes sense that the government closest to the people, the local government, has the most authority. Outside of a few things like waging war and making money, the local government has the most power. And so that's why we chose a local government approach.
Right. Okay. And I appreciated how you said constitutions. I caught that.
Yeah.
Tell the audience. Clearly, we have the federal constitution, and some people, it feels like sometimes they forget that each state has its own constitution. Tell our audience what the relationship is between those and how the Utah Constitution, does it empower local citizens the same way? Tell us a little bit.
Absolutely. So our federal constitution is considered the highest law of the land. I don't think anybody would dispute that, at least I hope they don't. And every single state, as you said, has its own state constitution. And from there, the state constitutions, they're never allowed to go against what the federal constitution says. They're not allowed to be more lax. They can be more stringent, but when it comes to reinforcing the intent that's already there in the federal constitution, if that makes sense. And our Utah Constitution, right, we go a little bit more specific, which is what states are supposed to do on like how cities and counties can be set up. And when it comes to agencies, like we have our State Board of Education, right? It talks about things like that, how it's to be funded and all that good stuff. And the terms that we use for local government, right? We have a House of Representatives and the Senate, right? And other states would have the Assembly instead of the House of Representatives, right? So differences, but unique differences. And of course, as we've been beautifully reminded in the past few years, the states actually have a little more authority outside of a few things, like I said, making money and military power, right? The states, again, have more of that power to decide well, how is it that we want to, be governed in this state? Like, what are our legal foundations that we want to operate within, right? Because every state is different, and that's okay. That's the way it's supposed to be. And so, like, you see that reflection of uniqueness, of individuality, of protecting the rights of the individual, because, thank goodness we can move from state to state, based on, the needs of our family. Right? My family is one of those. We
Nice.
moved from Washington State to Utah for very
Welcome.
good reasons. And yeah.
Good. Well, let me ask you this then. Tell the audience why, let's say that I'm on the city council as you were once on a city council. Why would the city council, tell us why the city council would engage UC3? What's the purpose of UC3's relationship with city councils?
That's a great question. So taking a city, for example, I look at my own city. I live in Saratoga Springs, and it is a very fast-growing city. We have a lot of people moving here, a lot of new growth needing to be dealt with. And in our case, and I think in all cities' cases, because I've traveled throughout the state and I've talked with a lot of different local elected officials, and they all have very similar frustrations. They have growth pains, literally growth pains. And one of the biggest pains is the state, our state government coming in and saying, well, you know what, for example, we want you to have a certain amount of density. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Before you say that, our city has, for example, in our vision, our community vision, we have, the neighborhood feel. We have a desire to have nature, certain, natural areas protected and accessible, because that we just want to, love the beauty that's out here and we want to live in it. And we don't want to look like a strip mall. That's not how we want to look.
Right.
And those growth mandates coming down from the state telling the city, saying, but this is what we are telling you to do. The city says, no, this is not what we want to do. Like, we can still accept growth, but you need to allow us to do it in the way that our citizens want, right? Because people move to different areas based on, I'll just use terms that I hear all the time, the vibe they get, right? There's just a neighborhood feel, or, oh, I love the city feel, there's so much energy and, commerce and business mixing together and it's great. Or I love the wide open spaces, I love being able to see the mountains and I love seeing the trees right there, and I don't have a neighbor within my immediate view site, right? I mean, everybody wants something different, right? Hence, going back to our Declaration of Independence, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Exactly. This is what it's all about. So UC3 comes in and says, local government, city, we're just reminding you that according to Article 11 in our own state constitution, we have a very strong home rule authority. And so it's okay for you to say, hold on, state, we understand where you're coming from. We understand that we have a lot of people wanting to move here, and we all need to do our part to make room for new people. We get that, but we have certain standards. And so we're going to require that, development be slowed down so that we can provide for the roads. We can design lots so that they're a little bit larger, because that's just what our city likes. We don't really want big rabbit hutch style apartment complexes, right? Nothing against living in apartments. I've lived in apartments before, but we don't live in one anymore.
Right.
But so we come in and we help to remind the local governments of their firm foundation that they already have in the Constitution, and give them the tools to say, thank you, but no thank you, or thank you. And, we're going to think about it and work it in our own way.
I see. Excellent.
There you
So
go.
we just had
Yeah.
thank you for that explanation. We just had a legislative session. Well, not just, earlier this year. Tell the audience
Yeah.
some of the things that came out from that session that you found both positive and perhaps a little concerning.
Okay. Well, I always like to start with the positive,
Me too.
and I'll end in the positive too. But
Good.
positive, we talked to a lot of different legislators this session, and we told them about what we were doing and the intent behind UC3, and that we're going to be bringing on members, and this is going to be a new advocacy team that they're going to get to work with, and also the information that we provide to them, because one of our key strategies and services that we provide is education, and it's for our members, but really to all elected officials that we work with, because it's so important for our elected officials to understand how to uphold their oath to the Constitution. Because I just want to remind everybody listening out there that when you become an elected official, it doesn't matter which state you become an elected official in, you take an oath to uphold two things, and that is the United States Constitution and the Constitution of the state that you live in. That's it. That's all. And so we're there to help them understand how to do their jobs through that lens. And some concerning things that happened during the session. Unfortunately, most of the bills that we were focusing on, and we decided to narrow our focus this year and just focus on the bills that had to deal with housing, and of course transportation kind of works itself into housing and zoning as well. So that was kind of the purview that we looked through, and every single bill that we followed, there were a few that were like a little less, but every single one had constitutional violations. And that I know.
Wow.
Every single one. Yeah. And in fact, we made these nice little reports, legislative wrap-up reports for our members and soon-to-be members, and we just kind of took a snapshot of the bills that we followed, and every single one, we have this nice little table. It says specifically, Article 11 of our Constitution, the Home Rule Authority, was it reduced? All 10 of these bills that I just took a snapshot of, yes, it was reduced every single way. And when I say home rule authority, it's not just the ability to make planning and zoning decisions, decide how developers get to operate within each city's and county's sandbox, so to speak. But it also requires, it hurts our taxing authority. So you may have heard, most cities and counties, most all local governments complain about unfunded mandates, right? There was one a couple years ago that greatly affected schools, for example, and we're going to see that implemented this year, and that has to do with school security. That was a huge unfunded mandate, and we're going to see some big changes coming through.
Explain to the audience just really quick. Explain just really quick, when you say unfunded, when you say unfunded mandate, tell us, what does that mean to anybody out there listening? What is an unfunded mandate from the legislature?
Okay, so that means that a law was passed through the state legislature, and now that goes down to a local government. Let's say it could be your city, your county, or even your school board, school district. And that mandate, that's a law. And when it's unfunded, it means that, for example, with the one that I was mentioning about schools, that is going to require more school security, for example. And that means that a school district, for example, is going to have to pay for possibly an officer or 2 or 3, depending on the size of their population. So school resource officers. And there were other things required of that. But also, when I was visiting Wayne County, the school district came in and talked to the county council about this. They needed the county to hire the deputy. And so that was an added expense on the county. And the school district would pay for its, fair share of that deputy. However, that ultimate burden, it goes on to the county. And so now the county is responsible for the training, the hiring, the pay, the retirement, everything of that deputy. And that all came from that one mandate from the state. And now we translate that down to the individual. What does that mean? Your taxes have to go up. Your fees have to go up, because remember, folks, government doesn't make money, right? Local, the people do, right? We're the ones who create the wealth. We have the businesses, right? So, so that money has got to come from somewhere. And that's what it ultimately means, right? It's an extra burden that has not been paid for.
Wow. So tell us then, explain what happens, those unfunded money. Explain, is there a remedy for the counties, or do they just hire UC3 and have you go talk to the legislature? I mean, tell us how that works.
Well, hiring UC3 would be great. It's part of that. But the main thing is that, to look at the law itself. Look at the law itself. When you analyze these laws, like I said, just the snapshot of the 10 of the bills that we were following over the session, and how they all violated the Constitution in one way or another.
Yes.
That is absolute grounds for a local government, a local municipality to say, wow, interesting law that you guys passed, but we took oaths of office to uphold our state constitution, our federal constitution, and you're actually asking us to violate the state constitution or the federal constitution. And we can't. We'd like to do what you're asking us to do, but we can't. I'm sorry. Now, that sounds like a very simple solution, but the good news is it's a very firm foundation that they are standing on when they say, no, we can't. Now, it does get sticky when the state or the federal government, depending on who you're working with, has money tied to these mandates. That is one of the hardest things, because local governments, whether it's larger, county like Salt Lake County, or a very small little town, like Loa, right? They have things that they have to provide, like roads, for example. They've got to keep those up. They've got to provide so much. And if there's growth, right, they've got to find ways to expand the roads. They are so expensive. And most local governments cannot do it themselves. They have to tap into other sources for funding. And that's what the state often does, is you'll see that a lot of these mandates, like, for example, the housing transit reinvestment zones.
Wow.
Yeah, that it's a big, long word, and basically it means high density access to transit, and unfortunately you're going to see homelessness increase around you. That's what's been happening in these zones, and it's really sad. But the state ties their transportation funding directly to that. So certain cities and counties of certain sizes that have a certain population size, they're required to implement these zones. They have to have zones in their areas, and like I said, it is really hard for them to say no, because if they say no, that means, oh, no transportation funding for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, let me go back to something actually that I said in your intro. I love the fact that you're coming at this from, I mean, obviously you've been involved in politics and you've put together policy, and you've won policy fights, but you also ran. And it's
Yeah.
different when you're sitting and you served, and it's different when you're
Mhm.
sitting in that chair, right, versus the other chair.
Yes.
I think our audience would be curious to know, how did serving on a city council shape your view of what you currently do? Did that help, shift some of the, your focus a little bit?
Hmm. It absolutely did. I served in a small city, under 5,000 population, so really small. That's probably why I
Wow.
have such a heart for small governments. But it opened my eyes to how things worked. At the time, our city was having issues with its comprehensive plan. And for those of you who don't know what a comprehensive plan is, it's basically like the master plan for how your city grows and develops, right? It's like the blueprint that you follow. And the state was, again, this was a state mandate, unfunded, and we were found to be in violation of several things. And so we had to redo it. And I learned a lot about how you make one and the different laws involved and how it felt really to be regulated.
Mm.
And that was really interesting. And I started working with local governments to help them with infrastructure applications, grant and loan infrastructure applications. So trying to get their big projects funded during that time. And it was interesting coming from that side of being the regulated
Right.
to assisting those being regulated. And, you learn a lot when you have to be under those rules. And I do have to say, it really taught me to watch my mouth, because anything and everything that you say could be absolutely spewed across the newspaper or on
Yeah,
Facebook the next day. And
absolutely.
so just whatever you say,
Right.
make sure
Right.
you're okay with it being on the news the next day.
Right. Right. You said something I think is fascinating, and I think a lot of our audience can really resonate with it. You said you understood how it felt to be regulated. I wonder if you can explain that a little more. Go a little deeper on that.
Yeah. Well, from from the from the viewpoint of a city council member who
Yeah.
is a representative of
Mhm.
all of your neighbors, your friends, family, and neighbors who live in your area, you get the direct communication
Right.
from the state when it says, oh, hey, guess what, so we just passed X, Y, and Z, and now you have to do this, right? This is now your new mandate and this is how you have to operate. And it's like, okay, wow, you guys really had no idea what it's like to try to
Mhm.
implement the laws that you created. And
Yes.
I think that's one of the best teachers that I had, was it helped me to see things full circle, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. So, you have our policymakers, right, at the state level or even the federal level for that matter, and they make these laws. Even like we'll just talk about the Beehive Development Agency bill that didn't pass, thank goodness. That was
Yeah.
Senate Bill 337 that was introduced at the very end of this session in 2025.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anyways, um, there was no forethought, and I'm sure that they tried. I know they tried. They have experts all around them and lots of different associations and lobbyists who are talking to them and giving them examples and advice while they're creating these things and drafting these laws. But there was no forethought to what it did as a local government trying to implement what they said. And in that case, I'll just say of Senate Bill 337, in that case, it was totally going to strip local authority and ability to plan, which is crucial when you have, all of our intense amount of growth that Utah is receiving all over.
Right.
And to not allow the freedom to create the kind of city that your citizens have envisioned from the very start of incorporation. It's in your little vision, right up on your website, hopefully, and written down somewhere. To have that come in, I mean, I understand what it's like to have to, think about pivoting funding and resources and hiring consultants to even tell you what the heck does this mean? How are we supposed to implement this? Because many times when those laws are passed at the state or federal level, there's not even much forethought on how exactly do we want this to implement? And that's sometimes where we have our bureaucracy, our state agencies, our federal agencies. They've been given rule-making authority, which is not, no, I won't totally get into that, but I will say that is not constitutional.
Yes.
I know that it's following the law because they've been given rule-making authority according to our laws, but that's not the idea of a representative republic, and which is what we live in. That's our form of government. Not a democracy, folks. It is a representative republic.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Yes.
Well, let me actually circle back to that, and because I wanted to ask your opinion on this as an expert in the field for our audience, help them understand. And I think what you brought up about beehive development, that bill that was introduced towards the end of the session, there are efforts, always some efforts, I think, to consolidate power, right? And people have spoken, for and against the inland port, for and against the beehive development, right? In your, help our audience understand with your expertise, what does that do to local cities and counties and towns when there's a consolidation of power like that within the state? Tell us how that affects sort of local cities and governments.
Well, it almost, I would say in extreme cases, because sometimes it's easier to understand the nuances of an issue when you look at, one side or the other, right? Yeah. On the, I would say, essentially constitutional side, you have a nice division of powers, right? You have executive branch, legislative branch, right? Judicial, and of course you've got local government, state government, federal government. Everybody stays within their own box. Yes. And that system was set up to allow, essentially, going back to the intent, the greatest freedom for the individual. Also the greatest amount of protection, because each layer of government is supposed to be a check on the other, right? Yes, so if local government oversteps, like property rights, for example, the state is allowed to come in and say, whoa, yes, city X, you guys are not respecting constitutionally protected private property rights, so we're going to have to step in and do something about it. Okay. Yeah. So that's on that side, that far, everything is working according to the Constitution side. That's kind of what it looks like. And to talking about planning and zoning, the cities and the counties, they can all look different. Now, of course, they, has to be some fluidity, right? When you're talking about roads and such, but they look different. They all have a different feel. Some are like big, dense developments, right? Big cities, and others are spread out. Every property has like 5 acres, right? Whatever. It's great. Yeah. It works. People get to choose where they want to live. Now, on the highly consolidated side, let's think USSR. Let's think China. I'm telling you, the interesting thing is, a lot of people don't think about this. It's a conservative, very conservative minded form of government, but hyper controlled. Yes. Hyper controlled. And so nothing is done at the local level. And as far as local government's concerned, you might be elected by the people, but all you are is rubber stamping what the state tells you or what the federal government tells you, right? It is There's no freedom of individuality. There's no creativity, right? Because everything's been consolidated at this level, and so everybody just does what this says, right? It's what the top central government says. That's it. That's
Right.
all. And I think this is why history is important, folks. History is beautiful and it always repeats itself. So we
Yes.
look at the history of like the USSR, or even just, I love the example of East Germany, West Germany before the wall came down, right? It was such a stark contrast. And you would be on the West German side and it seemed nice, and commerce was happening and people could freely move. And you went to the East German side and there were curfews, there were guys with guns making sure you didn't go where you weren't supposed to. People were constantly, listened to by the government, and there was no prosperity. That's the thing. There was no prosperity. People thrive when we have freedom, right? And that goes back to the original intent of our nation. And that is why we still, in spite of all our issues, we're still the greatest country in this world. We really are.
Yes.
And it's because we have the heart of freedom at the core of our highest laws, the constitutions.
That's right. I want to go back to something you said, and I really appreciate that explanation, and I want to go back to a theme that you've touched on a couple of times, more power to the people, right?
Yeah.
And I think at the state level, you'll hear this a lot. A lot of people will invoke, and whether that's our federal delegation, our statewide officials, local House and members of the House and Senate, they will often invoke the 10th Amendment. And they will invoke the 10th Amendment in saying, well, all the powers not expressly given to the federal government are reserved to the states, right? Now, how often have you heard them also invoke Article 11 of the Utah Constitution?
Not enough. I'll just say not enough. And it's okay, because so much of what we do in life, we do it because we've always done it, right? It's always just been the way that things work. And I know a lot of people, when I bring up the idea of home rule, I've had quite a few people say, oh, I don't think that really applies here anymore. I think, really? Yeah, which is interesting, but it's because the constitutions don't enforce themselves, folks. I think that is an assumption that many people, especially our elected officials, they operate on. They think that it's going to enforce itself, when in fact, it's one of those things where, like if you have, let's just say you have a personal goal and you're like, I'm going to drink more water. Well, it doesn't come naturally. If you are not a natural water drinker, you are going to have to set reminders, maybe on your phone, or put little Post-it notes, up on your bathroom mirrors or the kitchen, wherever it is, just to remind yourself throughout the day, drink water, because it doesn't come naturally. The same thing happens with the Constitution in our government, right? It doesn't happen naturally. And we have a lot of wonderful, smart, well-educated, and well-intentioned individuals who are in our government, whether it's our elected officials or their staff members. And they're wonderful and they help us so much. However, most of the time, I can't say all the time, but I'm going to say a high percentage of the time, they do not first look at the constitutions before they draft a bill, before they even have a debate about a bill. They don't. And even at the local level, when we pass, I'm just going to say, when I was an elected official at the city council level, never once did we have our staff go through our state constitution or federal constitution and say, as we talk about updating our comprehensive plan, for example, as we talk about this, let's look at it through the lens of the Constitution and make sure that we're respecting private property rights. Or the state told us to do this, however, it's actually violating this particular article in our Constitution. So we would advise you guys not to do that because you took oaths to uphold the state and the federal constitutions, right?
Right.
The idea is that you could get in big trouble for violating your oaths of office.
Well, and I was
That's
just
the
going to bring
idea.
that up because you had said earlier, right? Of course, every elected official takes an oath to the U.S. Constitution and to the state in which they're elected, right? But you
Yes.
combine that with your other statement about the Constitution doesn't defend itself. And it's like, well, then there's no relationship between that oath and enforcing the Constitution. Somebody has to help these people. And part of the beauty of our government is that we don't have, and in my opinion, don't want a professional political class, right? We want people coming who are our neighbors, who are representing us personally, which means they may or may not know. What other than your education, what have you seen that's helped to educate these legislators and give them the tools to know when or when not they're violating the Constitution? My assumption being if they knew, they wouldn't do it.
Well, one of the things that we did during this last session, for example, was that we would run our analysis because we have tools that analyze the language in the bills and compare it against our state constitutions and our federal constitutions. Say, are there any violations? If they are, what are they? And how egregious are they? And what solutions are there for local governments, right? To say no to this particular law. And so we do that and we make sure that first, we educate. That's the main thing is you have to let people know. Because like I said, most of the time people just don't know what they don't know. Right. And so we don't assume any evil intent from anybody. Right. We just assume they don't know. And so we let them know, we inform them. And, and that's as UC3, as we grow, the whole idea is to have the members, have the numbers of cities and towns and counties behind us saying, yes, collectively, we're all telling you that we don't want you to pass this bill because of this, or we do want you to pass this bill because it actually reinstates, our local authority here, right? And so that's one of the things that we do. And, we anticipate maybe having to have a public campaign or two on some issues. And that's okay. That's what it's all about, right? Getting people involved. And the more you start talking about something, the more people start thinking about it and thinking, well, how does this affect us? And how can we implement it?
Right. So let me ask you this. UC3, very effective organization, private organization. When UC3 says something, the legislators say, okay, they may take it as your opinion, they may take your data. When you say that, they can take it however they want. Is there no governmental organization or even a safety net to help them and say, hey, look, this is a violation of the Constitution? Is there structure within the government to tell them when they're violating that, outside of a private organization telling them that?
Yeah, it's called the courts. And
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, we don't have to go there. But really, I mean, that is part of the beauty of America is it is set up to have those checks and balances, right? I mean, it's even the legislature is supposed to tell the executive branch, whether it's the governor or the president, your executive order, actually, you guys kind of, you went above and beyond your duty, right? It's our job to set up budgets and whatnot, right? And so you can't do that, so one branch is supposed to correct the other. And, when it comes to the legislature itself, if they've violated the Constitution, and here you've got, like I said, the bills that were passed, they were passed because they were, one, passed by a majority of the legislature, and signed by the governor. So now you've got the executive branch and the legislative branch who have violated the Constitution. Well, now what do? Well, that's where local government can, one, start by saying, no, thank you, because we took oath and we're not going to violate our oaths. That's when you've invoked a legal precedent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can say, courts, we may need you to take an opinion. We may need your help here, but that's the beauty of our system.
Right.
And we'll see what happens, but the idea is to educate our legislative branch, our executive branch, and help them see I'm just talking about Utah, we have a love of the Constitution, we have a love of America in Utah that is, it is not like very many other states.
Right.
We love the Constitution in America. The majority of Utahns do. And we have, even within our state legislature, we have the Federalism Commission in our own state legislature. I'm so happy that we do. It's great. But we need to remind ourselves that it also applies to our state. And, it's kind of that old adage of one finger's pointing at somebody else, but you got three fingers pointing back at yourself. It's like, oh, sometimes we need to meet ourselves and just say, oh, wow, I guess I need to do it differently. And that's okay.
Yeah. If we're going to marry the fervor as a state that we have for the 10th Amendment, we need to marry that to building a similar fervor for Article 11 of the Utah Constitution, right? And perhaps suggest, along with the Federalism Commission, maybe a subcommittee that deals with, federalism at a state level, right? Or statism, or whatever you want to call it, where the state understands, look, you can't turn around and do to the cities and counties what the federal government's trying to do to you. That's kind of what I hear you saying. I mean, and I want to go back just one more time. I mean, you said more power to the people, right? And you take this example of, they make these oaths, and yet at the same time, sometimes just due to a lack of understanding, a lack of education, for example, they'll send out an unfunded mandate, right? Well, that takes power from the people. And so what I hear you saying is the only power that people have once something like that is passed is either a city council or a mayor that'll stand up and say, no, we're not going to do that, or they have to sue. Am I understanding that right? Is that because that narrowly limits the power of the people? I mean, help me if I'm understanding that correctly.
Well, yes and no, but there is the power of, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but nullification. And that's a term that I think it scares a lot of people because it sounds extreme, really. But it's really not. It is absolutely what I said before of saying, wait a second, we know what the Constitution says because that's what we stand on. Like, our authority comes from that Constitution. And we were just asked or told, by the state, by the federal government to do X, Y, Z, and it clearly violates, let's just say, Article 11 of our state constitution, the home rule authority that cities and counties and towns that they have. Well, we can't. We cannot do that. And like I said, sometimes there's funding attached to it. You hear the idea of a soft mandate, right? And so I'll just have an example of the executive order that the governor passed on May 28th, and it's 2025-06. Unfortunately, it's a soft version of SB 337, the Beehive Development Agency. So this doesn't have, because it was an executive order, it doesn't have the same authority as an actual law that was passed because, right, the executive branch, the governor is not supposed to make laws, but it's an executive order. So he can dictate how certain funding is crafted, like the requirements to receive money from, let's just say, the Governor's Office of Economic Development, or UDOT, our Department of Transportation. There's a lot of funding that local governments depend on for various projects, and it is really hard to say no to that. However, when you can prove that the mandate coming down from, like the state in this example, is coercive, absolutely coercive, again, you can say, look, no. And if you don't like what we're doing, take it to a different authority, take it to the courts, but we're saying no. And you still need to allow us to apply for this funding and give us fair treatment, but your requirement for putting up, certain density of housing or something like that, or how transit reinvestment zone, housing transit reinvestment zone, that is absolutely violating the Constitution.
Right. So what I hear from you, and let me try and summarize this. I mean, our constitutions were built to push power to the people, that the individual is sovereign in this country. But you need layers of government, and we have that.
Right.
But it really hit me when you said that and I want to get this right, every single bill that you tracked had a constitutional violation in it. Again, not for malintent, not because some, they're trying to take over, but just a misunderstanding, right?
Yeah.
And when that happens and you're pushing down unfunded mandates and you're consolidating power in the state, what you're doing at its core is taking away power from the individual, taking away the promise of the Constitution. Would you say that's right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Wow. So let me pause and do a little station identification. I'm really enjoying this conversation, Sarah. I'm excited to keep going. You're listening to KMMU, Main Street Media, Utah. We're live on YouTube, Rumble, X, and on our website, kmmu.org. Thank you for listening. You can call in with your questions for Sarah and for me. Our number is 385-899-2134. Our lonely call screener is waiting for your call. He'd love to hear from you. So thank you for that. I think that's going to be an important point as we move forward, that well-meaning, very well-intentioned legislators, in an effort to do what they think are right without the right level of education from someone like C3 or the courts, they actually strip power from the individual. And I want to talk about something that I find really interesting about UC3. So UC3 is a specific to Utah organization. Is that right? There are other organizations out there that are not specific to Utah, that are more national. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So there are not very many member-based associations like UC3 who represent local governments, cities, towns, counties, right? We have in Utah, we have the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and we have the Utah Association of Counties. And those are the main associations that actually represent the local governments here. So UC3 is another organization. It's kind of the first one that is similarly representing local governments. And of course, you have private lobbying firms that will represent a city or a county for a specific project. But UC3 is the first statewide association that is similar to the league and to the Association of Counties. Now they have, and just so you know, there are associations like them in every single state in the nation, and it's typically only 2. But they have national organizations that they are tied to, the National League of Cities and Towns, the National Association of Counties. And so those associations, again, great intentions. It's a great idea to have local government, local voices, right, at the national levels. However, those associations, they don't, at their core, have, making sure that the constitutions are upheld.
Yes.
That's, that is not part of their core, right? They talk about upholding local authority, but if you go on their websites and look at a lot of the policies, right, they're the ones who come up with the like policy themes, and they create a lot of the model policies and ordinances that your cities and counties will ultimately be implementing.
I see.
So, you kind of think that, well, if I have a great local government, I helped with the campaigns for my local city council members, right? We have these great people on there. Well, the thing is you think that because these individuals have certain values and this is what they stand for, that they're going to have ordinances and stuff come through them that reflect who they are. That's not necessarily true. They're going to be listening to the advice of their staff, who are also connected to national organizations also, might I add, like the National Planning Organization. We have public works organizations. All of them are fed how to do things, fed the instructions through those veins. And it is, again, they don't have at their core, how do we help local governments, local elected officials uphold their oaths of office and make sure that, even your city administrator knows how to do his job through the lens of the constitutions? That's not what they do. They do other things. And so it is really important to understand as a citizen that as much as you think that the local government is representing you have a great relationship with your city council member, they're being told what to do in many cases. Right.
And so, it looks like we have a caller. Our is going to bring in a caller. Excellent.
Hello. We have a caller with questions. Go ahead, Diana.
Hey, guys. Great listening to you today. I just had a quick question for Sara in particular. So in your experience, obviously working in states like, Nevada and Montana, how does Utah compare when it comes to cooperation between the state government and the local cities, obviously, and the counties? And would you say that Utah is more unified, or are we more divided in how those relationships play out?
Thank you, Diana. Yeah, how does Utah compare? Excellent question. Thank you. Tell us your insights.
Well, I will say that the phrase unfunded mandate applies everywhere you go. It doesn't matter which state you're in, everybody identifies with that. I will say that for Utah in particular, how it compares to some of the other states, there's been a greater push, I would say even more recently, to centralize control at the state level, even faster than a lot of these other places. Nevada is fiercely independent. They tend to be a lot more libertarian in a lot of views. But and Washington State has, it's like centralized control, but it's more through too many mandates, so many regulations, and a lot of their state agencies have a lot more control over local things than what we do in Utah. And I'll just say a really good example how you can see how that plays out in real life is, how long does it take to build a road in Washington State versus how long does it take to build a road in Utah? And, hands down, Utah wins in terms of timing, good for that.
Interesting. So there's a spectrum essentially, and you'd put maybe Washington on one side, Nevada kind of far over here, and Utah, if I'm understanding you right, a little more towards the more unified side. Is that a good way to say it? Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you for the call, Diana. We appreciate you calling in.
Absolutely, Sara. Thank you for that. That was perfect.
Okay, thanks.
So I want to bring our audience to a current event. And I think that you'll be perfect to kind of help us analyze this current event. We're all seeing in the news what's happening in California and specifically Los Angeles. And you have the riots going on. They're triggered by ICE, arresting people for the deportations, and then protesters are coming in. And, regardless of what anyone thinks on the topic of illegal immigration, deportations, mass deportations, what the Trump response is, you have layers of government, right? And each of those layers of government are doing, from what it looks like from the outside, a different thing. You've got Mayor Bass, the mayor of LA, who's doing one thing. You have the governor doing a different thing. You have the federal government doing a different thing. From your perspective, explain to us your insights on how that's working or not working, and what could be done beforehand to make sure that doesn't, turn into quite the fiasco that it is. Please.
Well, it's a really sad situation that is happening in California right now. But go back to the core, right? Why are people fighting in the first place? Why are we seeing the rioting in the first place? And that is because of immigration, right? We have our federal government who absolutely has the authority for enforcing immigration into our country, period.
Right.
So our federal government, through the Trump administration, has said that is one of their top priorities, is to enforce our border and to commence with deportations, because we have a lot of people who are here that are not legal citizens. So they're in violation of federal law. Okay, so that is absolutely the responsibility of the federal government. And so they are enacting that, they're enforcing that through ICE, our Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, right?
Yes.
Now you have a state, California, and California is a little funny. They have they're considered one of the sanctuary states,
right?
Which means that they don't want the federal government to come in. Well, first of all, you got to understand that the state has no right to stop the enforcement of immigration laws. However, it means that they can only control their own law enforcement. So that would be like state law enforcement. So the state of California could say, hey, State Patrol, Highway Patrol, we don't want you to cooperate with federal ICE agents when they come to try and deport certain individuals or groups of individuals, right? Well, they can do that to an extent, but you could get a judge to grant a warrant and then force the state to help you. The city of Los Angeles, for example, they are also a sanctuary city. So you have like a sanctuary city within a sanctuary state. And so again, they can only control what they can control, which would be their local law enforcement. And again, the federal government is the only one that has the right, the legal right to come and enforce our immigration laws. And, again, division of powers, right? That's okay. Right. Now the mayor, now they have riots. So we're going to throw that in there too. Now we see riots happening, and you've got the safety, right? You've got safety. And so I think a lot of people saw, the Trump administration said, hey, I'm deploying troops, right? Well, they have every right to federalize the National Guard in California. They can federalize the National Guard. And so, right, exactly. And so that's actually under the Insurrection Act, which you got to be careful where you use that word, because some people have a little reminder, J6, so under the Insurrection Act, like the president can deploy federal troops or federalize the National Guard if violence interferes with federal laws, which, again, going back, why are they there in the first place, right? It's ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, right? They're there to get rid of illegal people.
Right.
Right. And so that is totally within their purview, right? So it would be reasonable, according to our Constitution, to say, I guess the president has every right to send in the National Guard, which then you can look at the governor of California's response. He's saying, that's not right. He's saying that, you have no right to do that. But actually he does. He does have the federal government does have every right to do that in this case. Now, if the governor wanted to help just with the riot side, right, they can, of course, under their own code in their state, their constitution, they can deploy the National Guard, right? That is absolutely, every state has their own National Guard. My husband was a part of our state for a long time. And yes, and so you have that. Now, I think people have probably heard also on the news that the mayor of Los Angeles has decided to implement a curfew.
Yes.
And that's a very reasonable response when something like this happens, when you have riots breaking out and you're trying to quiet down areas and at least give the local law enforcement, this is, again, that's totally in their purview, local law enforcement, right? They give them the ability to go in and quiet down certain areas to try and dissuade all of the illegal activity that's going on, right?
The illegal activity in the peaceful protests.
Right. Right.
Well, let me ask you this, and again, I love that you started this interview with this, and I want to get back to it because I think it's an interesting comparison, right? We're talking about more power to the people. Tell us how you would respond to someone that said, well, then if we're giving more power to the individual, why do we allow the federal government to, for lack of a better word, trump the responses of the state and the city? Why in this case is it not more power to the people? Tell us your thoughts.
Well, it's because there's something about the protection of the people. That is governments, like I said in the very beginning of the interview, the different levels of government, they actually serve as a check on one another. And so in this case, Trump saw that the state was actually allowing harm to happen to the individuals living there, because the majority of California is not rioting. The majority of California is not, actually, I'll even say this, the majority of California is, according to polls, not even in favor of keeping the illegal immigrants there. And so in that response, right, our federal government rightly said, okay, state, you're not doing your job. You need to be in there because our job is to, one, enforce the immigration laws. And we are trying to remove these people who are here illegally. And now you're allowing possible citizens, I don't know where these people come from, but these people are attacking our government law enforcement. And so we have to, we have the duty to protect our law enforcement folks, right? I have family who are part of ICE. We absolutely need to protect them, allow them to do their job. And state, you have got to allow that to happen. So again, when it comes to more power to the people, what power does a people have if laws are not being followed? Like, there is power and freedom in consistency and knowing that when you walk down the street, when you drive down the street, right, you're not going to be hit at an intersection because most people obey the traffic laws, right? There's traffic laws, right, to keep chaos at bay, right? To bring order, right? There's freedom in order. And that's what we're seeing really at play, is the order of things and the order of our different levels of government kind of rubbing up against one another saying, no, I want this. No, I want this. Well, ultimately, let's just go back. Let's look at a neutral document that says how we're supposed to be operating as our constitutions.
There you go. I love how you said that. And that's fascinating to me. We were talking just a second ago about on a spectrum, here's Washington, here's Nevada, kind of here's Utah, right? And it seems like there's also a spectrum in this regard, right? In terms of freedom. And you said something very interesting. You said there is freedom in order, and there is, right? But there's also freedom, and I love that you used this word earlier, prosperity, right? In being able to chart your own course, right? To find your own destiny, right? And sometimes that means that if the state's doing something one way, well, LOA or Kanab or Scipio, they're going to do it a different way, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that spectrum there. How do states and how do the cities and counties know? Like, how do they know, in your opinion, how do they know where that line is and when it's best to go with the city, when it's best to go with the state, when it's best to go with the will of the people?
That's a great question. And again, I would take you right back to the Constitution. We brought up Article 11 a lot, and it talks about the planning, the zoning, even transportation, roads and such. Like it's within the purview of a local government, policing authority. It's within the purview of the local government to decide the levels, what it looks like. So again, you got to go back to the foundation. And that's, at the beginning, I said, why do we exist? It's to reinstate, to reinforce the constitutional authority of local governments. It's been forgotten. And, like I said in the beginning, too, I think there's an assumption that we all operate on the Constitution, right? It's working by itself. Well, no, it doesn't. You have to purposely bring it in and say, all right, just like, okay, I wear glasses. And so anybody's listening to me on the radio, I have glasses on. And so I look through lenses, right? And these lenses help to correct my vision, right? And so just in that same vein, the Constitution needs to be used to help correct our vision when it comes to authority, who's in charge of what. That's what it is. It's the rules of the game, right? You're not going to play a brand new board game and not look at the instructions, right? I mean, that's you violate the point of playing the game. So you got to know the rules.
To that point that the Constitution doesn't enforce itself, there was a famous quote by President Obama when he said during his second term, it's legal if you don't stop me. It's legal if someone doesn't stop me. And it's infuriating, but he's not wrong.
He's not wrong.
Right? If there's no check and balance, or there's a check and balance, but that check is abdicated, right? The responsibility of that check is just let go, right? And when that happens, to your point, that you get back to this spectrum, right? Of, well, there's freedom and order, but there's also this side of it where there's just this rule-making authority by the states. And you were up at the session this last time. How often do you see that as sort of a knee-jerk reaction? And by that, I mean, how often is the spectrum tilted towards the rulemaking rather than, well, let's let the cities decide, let's let the counties decide? Just
unfortunately, I would say that let's just make a rule that trumps almost all the time. And again, this is where our founders really anticipated, and they built the rules of the game, our constitutions, on the fact that there would be civic engagement, that we, the citizens, actually would know what the rules are, and we would be able to hold our elected officials accountable, saying, hey, whoa, Mr. Smith, Representative Smith, that's actually violating our private property rights, the rule that you want to put in, the law that you want to put in place. That's the way it was supposed to be. And I heard a great analogy a long time ago. and I forget who said it, but basically they said, okay, let's just pretend you have a business and you decide to hire some person who's, good, they know their stuff, but you say, okay, you take care of this business, and for 2 years I'm just going to be hands off and I'm going to go away and let you do the thing, right? 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. Okay, that's the term limits we have for representatives, senators, right? Okay. So the boss, who is the citizen in this case, totally hands off. What do you think is going to happen? As a business owner myself, like, I would never do that. I would always check in and say, how's it going? Or, you look at certain indicators. Well, how are we doing in selling this or that, right? Are we making a profit? And is it working, right? Am I getting calls from the IRS? Am I doing something wrong, right? You need to have your pulse on what's going on. And you can't forget to remind that person, and in this case, it would be your representative, your senator, right? Hey, these are the rules, right? These are the rules I need you to play by. This is the Constitution of our state. This is the Constitution of the U.S., right? You have to be reminded of what those rules are. Otherwise, out of sight, out of mind. And I just have to say that one of the biggest reasons that we see a lot of too many rules and rulemaking authorities. We have a lot of special interest groups. We have a lot of lobbyists who go up there and tell, people what they need to do. They tell the representatives, they tell the senators, this is what you need to do. And they're in their ear all the time, telling them that this is the way to go. And maybe they've polled about 100 people and they say, oh, look, everybody says this is the way to go, right? And who is that senator or representative to know whether they're right or wrong? Well, I just have to say that, again, this is like if you're wanting to drink more water, right? You got to remind yourself, no, go back, drink the water. Okay. As an elected official, go back, wait, is this in the Constitution? Oh, is this part of the job that I'm supposed to be doing? That you have to be reminded, and it's a self-imposed regulation. You gotta do it. And it's just nobody's in the practice really of doing that, or very few of them are.
Right. It reminds me of the Benjamin Franklin quote that you have a republic, man, if you can keep it. But I never, and I want to thank you for this, Sarah, because I've never applied that to the actual legislators. I'd always applied that to us and to civic engagement and to being involved and becoming a delegate and running for office, right? But once you're in office, right, your obligation almost increases to say, if you can keep it, you can have a republic. Right. But again, I get back to what you say, and I'm just flabbergasted. Every bill that you tracked in this last session had some sort of constitutional violation, not because of malfeasance, but because of misunderstanding. And when that happens, it strips the power from the people. You said something earlier that I thought was interesting, that, and I totally agree with, that the freedom that people have equals prosperity, right? And we don't often link those two things. The more free we are to chart our course and to go down our own path, the more we're going to be able to be prosperous, right? We're not going to be doing something that somebody else wants us to do. We're going to be doing something that is our passion, and that's going to be that's going to end in prosperity for us. There was a bill, and I want to get your take on this specifically. There was a bill, HB 229, that dealt with eminent domain, and as I remember, it had to do with something you've mentioned before. It was eminent domain power to prioritize state-selected transit corridors, overriding local authority on land use. And I wonder if, and I bring that up because A, it's a little bit dry, but also B, it's incredibly important. And I wanted to get your take on it, and I want to loop that into, towards the end as we're getting closer to the end here, to say, how do people get involved? Do they get involved through you, or what would you suggest for people? So I'd love to take on HB 229.
Well, HB 229 was, well, I would say it violated the Constitution. It did. It violated Article 11. And, again, this was just another one of those, I think it sounds good, we need more rules, right? We need to help direct housing and transit and transportation, right? It's more of that like streamlined, centralized planning kind of a theme, right? But then what it did, overriding local authority, again, not all cities, not all counties, not all towns want to have that kind of development come through their area. That is not in the best interest of how they set up their community standards, right? They have, I would say, when I say they, the local officials have an obligation to uphold community standards, right? The vision that they have for their local area. And laws like HB 229 absolutely, they're telling them to violate that direct edict, right? That's why they're there, is to uphold that community vision. And of course, in Utah, growth everywhere, growth. And so they have to try to grow, help grow out of that vision. And again, if you have laws that are coming in that totally disrupt the rules of the game, which are our constitutions, okay? Those are the rules, right? It's like somebody coming in and playing a board game and say, hey, I'm invoking, all aces are wild for women over 40, right? Wait, no, you can't do that. No. And so it's the same kind of thing. It's disrupting the game. And that's where local citizens, I will say this, as a citizen, not an elected official, not a lobbyist, nothing, just if you can encourage, if you can develop a relationship with your local elected officials, that they're there to represent you. You should know who they are and have a relationship with them. And if you can get other people around you, like 20, honestly, if an elected official can hear the same thing from about 20 people, all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow. Oh, I guess I do have, it's like you're kind of growing their backbone. You're strengthening their resolve to go ahead and say, okay, this feels uncomfortable because I have, the state saying, you will do this. And the state's so big and scary, right? And they have all this money and they have all this power. But when you, as an elected official, because I've been there, if you have a group of citizens coming back and saying, no, look, our Constitution says this, look, our community vision says this, our community standards are this, and we don't want you to do that. Here, protect us, stand up. We're with you. We're with you. They need to hear that. That's the whole point. Again, that's part of our representative republic form of government that is unique and fabulous compared to everywhere else in the world. This is the best way to do it. It really is. But when the citizens step back and allow paid interest groups to step in instead, well, like we have a really big interest group in Utah, and it happens to be our developers. And they have a really loud voice. And so if you seem to be seeing like a lot of developers kind of taking over areas, well, there's a reason for that. So I would just encourage individual citizens, get with your elected officials because they really need to hear from you. And it's not a big deal to, take them out for a soda or, have them, have a little meeting in your own house, invite them over. That's what they're there for. Go to their office, just set up an appointment with them. They're people and they represent you. Yes. Remember that. They work for you. You are the boss. That's the way it works.
Absolutely. Well, and to go back to something you said earlier about, there's this balance, right, between, the state sees certain needs and needs to, needs to do their job and get them fixed, but they have to balance that against the needs of the people. And who is there to represent the needs of the people? It's the cities and counties, right? And in a lot of cases, again, and I really appreciate you making an effort to not hang your bad or a dunce cap on the legislature, right? But just to say, in a lot of cases, it's just that people don't understand where the constitutional boundaries are, right? Because that balance, in a lot of sense, justice is balance, freedom is balance, right? When you have developers that want one thing and the citizens don't, there's a balance there, right?
Right.
Counties have something they need, the state wants something else, you have to find a balance. And it sounds like as you do your job at UC3 and you're talking and especially educating, right? The hope isn't to say, okay, well, these people are always right and these people are always wrong. It's to help them understand the constitutional limits, to find the boundaries, and to really understand kind of, this is where we're going to find the most freedom and therefore the most prosperity.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Sara, I just want to say thank you. What an excellent interview. I've been fully educated myself. If people want to learn more about UC3, where do they go?
You can find us at Utah UC3.org. And if you want to fill out the contact form, get more information, we'll respond to you. And I've been traveling all over the state, talking with local governments, counties and cities and towns. And if you are in a city or town or county and you are listening to this, tell them about us, because for your sake, they need to sign up with us and help to reinforce, reinstate, and just get back to the Constitution. Let's make Utah constitutional again.
I want to bring up one word before I let you go. And I wrote this word down specifically: reinstate, reinforce, and amplify. I really love the use of that word, because to me, that's, I'm one person and I sit in my house by myself and maybe I have an opinion, right? But what do I do with it, right? And then someone like comes along and says, hey, let me amplify what it is that is important to you. Let me amplify your freedom. Let me amplify your prosperity by making sure, and here we have, thank you, Dwayne, for putting on the screen the website for the Utah Coalition of Cities and Counties. That word amplify, I think, is really important, because people lose hope. They lose hope thinking, well, I'm just one person. And that's why they don't vote. I'm just one vote. And that's why they don't go talk to their neighbors, because they don't care what I think, because I'm just one person. But know that you have allies. And this is to our audience. Know that you have allies. Know that you have Sara Davenport-Smith. You have the Utah Coalition of Cities and Counties. And that your legislators want to hear from you. You're not just one person, you're more than that. And that's what makes this country free. And that's what makes this country prosperous. And Sara, I think you're an excellent example of that. And I thank you for the work that you're doing to help reinstate, reinstate, and amplify people's voices. Thank you, Sara. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. And we are excited to be on this road, because now is the time. I think a lot of people are excited to get back to our foundation. And the cool thing is, I want to say one more thing about how excited I was during the legislative session. I spoke with Republicans and Democrats, all from all our different districts throughout the state. They all loved what we're doing, and they all saw the value of what an association like UC3 could do for the state. So I'm excited, because it just proved my point that the Constitution works for everybody. It doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. The Constitution is there for you. And I thought it was actually very interesting how much I've seen, even in this issue with California and the federal government, that Gavin Newsom brought up the Constitution, saying, violation, isn't that a violation? And I'm like, I'm so glad he's looking at it.
I'm glad he found it. That's nice. Somebody said it to him. Yeah, it's very nice.
Right.
That's great. Well, and I walk away from this, with a better sense of balance in freedom, right? I mean, we talk about, cities and counties and representing them, but also representing them. And I thought this was a really important point. I don't want to gloss over this, from a local level, so that organizations that are national, maybe they're based in Philadelphia, maybe they're based in Atlanta, maybe they're based in DC, And they don't know what's happening in Richfield. They don't know what's happening in Box
Right.
Elder, right?
No.
But you do,
Mm-mm.
because you're talking to them every day. And so
Mhm.
as the people say, hey, my city councilor or my county commissioner, I want you to understand a little bit better and talk to these people. These people are local. These people understand us. Sarah lives in Saratoga Springs, right? These
Mhm.
people are here and want our best interests. And I'm walking away from this conversation, and I'm grateful to you for this, for a better understanding of the importance of balance within freedom. You know, there's a balance between order and rulemaking and just, you know, people doing what they want in their cities and towns. But understanding that balance will lead to more freedom, will lead to more prosperity for us, for our children, and for our children's children if we can all work together. So, Sarah, I'm very grateful for what you're doing in this state and in this country. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it is my absolute pleasure to do this.
Well, as we log off, I'll just remind our listeners you're listening to KMMU Main Street Media. We're live on YouTube, Rumble, X, and our website, kmmu.org. Thank you for listening. You can call in for questions for any future show at 385-899-2134. I want to say thank you again to our guests, Sara Davenport-Smith and UC3. And we'll talk to you next week on Talk with Trent. Thank you.